Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre. Elizabethan theatre, well, first slightly before Elizabethan theatre, theatre was controlled by the church and was mostly used to perform Bible verses and a select few moral lessons that the church endorsed. This ownership of theatre by the church meant that performances could only be done if they had a Christian message, and actors were not a true profession, as it was quite a seasonal job, as some of the bigger plays that the church put on were holiday dependent, such as Easter performances about the resurrection of Christ, or Christmas performances about Christ's birth. If actors were to perform were specifically pandered to a patron in order to get them to sponsor the troupe, meaning a lot of plays that weren't endorsed. This would all change once Elizabeth came in, and actors could perform outside of the church or nobility's estates. Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre. Elizabethan theatre started in 1558 and ended in 1603. But before we get to that, we should go just slightly before. I can do that better. The church required them. Elizabeth would come in and change this, however. I still forgot to do the bloody transition. Oh, I'm gonna make a fucking bloopers video. Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre. Elizabethan theatre started in 1558 and ended in 1603 with the rule of Elizabeth. I've got to start that again. Elizabeth would come in and change this, losing. It lasted from 1558 to 1603 under the rule of Elizabeth I. However, pardon me, to see how caveman noises. Acting was I remember the transition at least on church grounds or estates. However, this would change under the rule of Elizabeth. Oh, I forgot the transition again. I may as well. Oh no. Fuck. I have to plug in my Chromebook now because of how long this is taking. Acting was not a fully fledged to guide them through life. Acting was not a fully fledged profession. Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Jacobean and Jacobean theatre. Christian plays done for nobility or the church. I forgot the transition again. Never question the church. Never question the church. Hello, and welcome to my presentation on jacking my fucking cock under the rule of Elizabeth I. However, I'm just as bad as the tech team. But to truly understand how Elizabethan theatre Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Jacobean and You're not first. Plays were often pandered, leading to them often being for the upper class, to the lower class, is A Midsummer Night's Dream, a Shakespearean play from 1596. I can cut that out. a Shakespearean play from 1596. It's a comedy. It's a comedy. It's a comedy. However, when theatres came along, this changed. I didn't even mention acting troupes. Seasonal work when you needed some quick money. Speaking in tongues is not going to help with it. Under the rule of Henry VIII and others before him, theatre was predominantly controlled by the church. This meant that most of the plays put on were miracle plays, plays about morality or Bible verses put on for a congregation. This meant that acting was not a fully fledged career, but instead seasonal work when you needed to pick up some extra money. Theatre could be performed in the church, but also at the estates of nobility. However, once Elizabeth came along, this would change. The most succinctly I've talked, and I forget to hit the bloody transition. Fuck you, Cupid. However, when Elizabeth came to the throne, she would change this. It's got dark outside. And you still can't see the screen. However, when Elizabeth came to the throne, this would change. And so should this. You'll never guess what this is a presentation on. Hello, and welcome to my presentation on Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre. Elizabethan theatre lasted from 1558 to 1603, under the rule of Elizabeth I. However, to truly understand how Elizabeth changed theatre, we need to look at what theatre was like before her rule. Under the rule of Henry VIII and many before him, theatre was predominantly run by the church, putting on miracle plays about lessons from saints or certain morals that they wanted watchers or the congregation to guide them through life. These plays were performed seasonally, meaning that acting was not a fully fledged career, and instead a seasonal job you picked up when you needed money. These plays could be put on in the church, but also at the estates of nobilities. However, when Elizabeth came to the throne, this would all change. Elizabeth would separate theatre from the church as one of her many moves to work on the domestic affairs of England, as this was her goal as a monarch, leading to her famously not marrying so as not to marry the state off with her. Once theatre was removed from the church, actors formed into troupes, which had to be licensed, and could perform plays they had the licenses to. These troupes could be sponsored by nobility if they needed some extra funding. However, this did lead to some playwrights pandering to the patron rather than the church. This led to some plays coming off perhaps as propaganda, such as Macbeth speaking out against regicide just a year after the Gunpowder Plot. Because playwrights were pandering to their patrons, this meant the material they came out with seemed to please them first and their audience second, rather than simply writing because they wanted to. While the plays were more secular than they were before, there was still a noticeable trend. Acting troupes, once they had their licence, were usually named after the nobility that sponsored them, or something they ruled over. For example, the Leicestershire's Men, sponsored by Robert Dudley, and other groups such as Lord Strange's Men, the Chamberlain's Men, Admiral's Men, and the King's Men. All of the acting troupes were comprised of men, as per the name, as women were not allowed to act on stage. However, soon permanent theatres would be installed, so that acting became more of a career, and the first theatre, opened in 1576, was simply called the Theatre. It was at the time an original name, and was funded by an actor called James Burbage. The installation of permanent theatres meant that acting was more of a career, and that plays could have higher budgets as less was spent travelling around or paying for inns to stay the night, making it more of a real job. People from all backgrounds could come and watch plays at varying qualities. Even women were allowed to watch plays, despite the fact they couldn't act. Jacobean theatre, lasting from 1603 to 1625. Jacobean theatre did not change theatre too much, as James I was focused on other factors. Because his tie to the throne was weak and he was Scottish, he was focused on consolidating power rather than changing how England was run. For example, when he was sponsoring Shakespeare's troupe, Macbeth spoke out against regicide a year after the attempted attempt on his life. So what was theatre actually like at this time? Theatre was laid out very differently to how it's laid out today. For example, most of the buildings were circular, with a stage in the round, watching balconies from around the stage, and a lower level where common folk could stand and look up at the stage. The seats enclosing the stage were not reserved for nobility, but had a higher price, meaning it was usually the nobility who sat there, and the standing seats were far cheaper. There was a roof overheading the stage, but the common folk audience was subjected to whatever elements seemed to subjugate the theatre at that time. Because the theatre was open roof, this meant that lighting was also quite minimal, or temperamental. Backstage was actually behind the actors at this point, which is likely why it was named that, rather than offside, as there was no off the wings. As I stated, lighting was quite minimal during this time, meaning most plays were written to be during the day, as this was far easier. However, there was minimal set design during these times, as it was just whatever the stage was. However, to make up for this, there was usually expositionary dialogue, or narrators, stating where the characters were. Another way they made up for this was incredibly intricate costumes, which gave the actors more of a role, so that they weren't so dependent on the set. Some not-so-fun fact about theatres: they had no bathrooms in this era, so common folk usually went there and then. Food sold in theatres was very different to what is sold today, such as fresh fruit and watered-down ale. Elizabethan theatres doubled as locations for gambling and bear-baiting, as well as likely other immoral activities. Puritans were not big fans of theatres. Some tomatoes. The performance I chose was Midsummer Night's Dream. Midsummer Night's Dream is a play written by Shakespeare in 1596, a comedy following the lead-up to the wedding of Theseus and Hippolyta, as well as various characters sorting out their love and squabbles. The part that we focus on is the play performed by the artisans, a group of poorer characters which can be seen rehearsing earlier in the play. Our scene is from Act 5, Scene 1, in which they finally perform at the wedding reception. We embrace the comedy of this scene as we strategically placed our background flat lengthways so that we could still peek over onto the stage, while still having a backstage, accurate to the time as it was actually behind us. The costumes themselves were also part of the comedy, with certain characters having quite outlandish costumes, while still remaining as true to the time as we could within reason. For my soliloquy, I chose Hamlet, one of the most well-known soliloquies out there. However, this is for a reason, as I intend to act it as it is a life-changing decision, and possibly the end of Hamlet's life, where he chooses how his fate will run. I broke the soliloquy into sections of 3 to 5 lines, so I could block it in those sections rather than worrying about the soliloquy as a whole, which could possibly lead to certain sections falling flat in light of other sections. And that's my presentation on Elizabethan and Jacobean theatre. Thank you for listening.